Welcome to a ChatGPT test. What I want to do is embark down the road of modifying some VBA code that I have without actually going in and editing the code, other than just telling ChatGPT what I want it to do. So let me set up this situation. One of the things I try to do on documenting my workbooks is to create a tab that contains macros that are used in the workbook. That way the user can see what they are and include some usefulness around what they do so that the user's aware. But years ago I found a macro that creates a list on the internet, and I used it thanks to Google. This is not something I can create on my own, and there were deficiencies in it, meaning there's just things I've had to live with over the years, and it wasn't that big a pain that I decided I wasn't going to invest the time to figure out how to fix it. So I'm going to walk you through what that current macro does, and then we're going to embark down the road of seeing if we can clean it up to get it ultimately to a point where this is what I want every time I run this macro in a workbook. And just for frame of reference, this macro sits in my personal macro workbook. Here I brought the macros into this workbook so we can do the demo. Let me just show you. So this is just a blank workbook called Don Macro Workbook, and it's a macro enabled file, XLSM, and it's got a bunch of macros in it. And I'm just going to show you what these macros are. You can see I have this workbook, and there's just all these macros, and basically they're available to me whenever I'm working in Excel because they're in my personal macro workbook, which is an active workbook that enables me to use these macros across all my workbooks. So in there is this macro called list out macros used. So I'm going to run that just to show you what happens and what I've been living with for about, I want to say 10 years. Okay, so this button is going to come into play later just to make the demo a little easier, because we're going to have to test this. But in the meantime, let's give this a whirl and see what it does. So I come in here and I say list out macros used, and I run it. And you'll see it gives me a list, no header, nothing. It's nice that it's a list. It gives me the module, but that's it. And then it gives me this message box, which I'm going to move here, which I really don't want. I don't need this. It was in the existing macro, and I've never gone in and tried to take it out. And I would just click OK, and it's done. And then I would clean up my list if I was going to include this. Well, there's a few problems with this. One, it creates it on whatever worksheet I happen to be on. So sheet 1, which I was on, it automatically creates that list. That's problematic for one reason. If I happen to be on an active worksheet and I run that macro, and I've done this, it'll overwrite some data, and then I just gotta close it and start again. Just not a big deal, but it does happen. I have to remember to go to a blank worksheet before I run this. 2, I wanted on a separate worksheet. So 1, I wanted to check if a macros list worksheet exists. And if it doesn't, if it's the first time I've run it, go ahead and create that macros list worksheet. Then this data, I would like it in a table, an Excel table. It's just cleaner, easier to work with, and I would like header rows. So I want a header row here, 2 columns, and I want it in a table format. So I need to have it converted to a list. When I run it again, because I'll need to update it. And lastly, I don't want the message box. So that's really 4 things I got to take care of in the macro code. So that is coming up next. And we will be using ChatGPT to hopefully make that happen.